Today is your lucky day because we are going to go inside our pumpkin tunnel and take a look. We're going to do a harvest today because it is time. The pumpkins have become so large and heavy that they are now hitting me in the head every time I try to walk through. And that means it's time to harvest and cure them. So we're going to do that. We're also going to take a look at the structure and see how it's holding up, because as we head into winter here, I'm probably going to be covering that tunnel and growing some spinach and things inside. So I'm going to try to get those seeds down this week and get them germinated and growing before it gets very cold. So I want to reinforce the tunnel before winter, because with our heavy snow loads, it can get quite weighed down. Now we've been growing in these tunnels. We've been growing in this tunnel for 4 years now. And this is the first time actually that I think it needs any reinforcing or fixing. And that's because I had one end open all winter. We had been storing our tractor in there as we were living off-site working on our house project. So I actually didn't have anything growing in there. And normally when I have both ends of the tunnel closed off, it holds up really, really well to wind. But because I had one end open, it had a little bit of hurricane force wind gusts going in there, and it kind of knocked one panel loose. So we're gonna repair that. But first, let's take a look at what's going on in the tunnel. All right, so here is the pumpkin tunnel. You can see it's really quite long. It is about, let's see, I think we have 8 of these 4-foot tunnels, so it's about 30 feet long. And we have a lot of different things. Even though I call it the pumpkin tunnel, it's actually not just pumpkins. We have loofah growing in here. We have pumpkins. We have some runner beans that are pretty and decorative. I really love those, and I am going to save some of those seeds, so we'll harvest that today too. And we have the pumpkins. We also have some low-growing ground cover and cover crops growing underneath there. And let's just take a quick walk inside. Oh, okay. You want to come out? Come on. You can come out. Hey, come on out. Come. Hey, Midnight. Come on. You're okay. Come on. You can come out. Wait, you don't want to walk past? Come on. Come on. You can come out. Come on. You don't want to? Okay, there you go. All right, let's take a walk through. Now, unfortunately, Midnight and Roosevelt have been out free ranging, and they've already started. This is sheep nibbling here, so I'm going to go ahead and cut and give them this one. But I do like growing pumpkins on this arbor, and there's a couple reasons for it. One is that it gets them up and off the ground. So for things like rats and bunnies that can sometimes eat the pumpkins and squash, this is a little bit better now. And that's not to say that the squirrels don't still get to these. They do a little bit. You can see there's a little bit of something that's been nibbling at this one. But for the most part, they tend to leave these ones alone. They don't like hanging off of this because it feels a little uneven and a little unstable, I think. So not as likely to chew them as the ones on the ground. And the other downside is if I don't catch them as they're starting to grow, they will grow into the panels of the arbor. So some of these I didn't catch in time and push out, and so then they grew through. Now, one of the questions that I get a lot is, do I have to sling these or support them in any way? Because we do have some pretty large pumpkins growing in here. Here's one, for example, that's pretty big. Here it is for perspective next to my head. And the question is, do I have to support them? No, I don't. I find with pumpkins, now melons can be a little bit different. Melons tend to need a little bit more support, I find, especially watermelon. But the pumpkins just grow a nice thick stem. So you can see how the stems get really, really thick here when they grow this way. So hanging already, the stems just thicken naturally. And so they can hold the weight of the pumpkin. Now, if they develop on the ground and then I were to try to trellis them up later after they'd already grown, that's when you'd run into them falling and breaking. So questions about spacing. What I do is this year we actually did spacing every 2 feet. All right, so here's the stem of one, and then over there is where the next one is. So about 2 feet apart seems to be the right distance and spacing for these to grow and be able to have enough space and sunlight that they can still produce. So if you plant too many of them too densely, then while you might get a nice green lush tunnel, unfortunately usually then it tends to crowd out the ability for the plant to bloom and create pumpkin. Oh, I change up every year what I grow in here. In terms of varieties of pumpkins, but typically I do include some kind of pumpkin in here. And this year we did a couple fun varieties. One of the ones that I grew was the Long Island cheese, and Long Island cheese is both decorative. It's a white pumpkin, which is always nice for making arrangements, but also it's good for cooking and eating and baking, and it's also a good storage pumpkin. The other one that I was growing is the Scalo d'Essine. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but it's French, and it grows and then it develops so it looks like these little peanuts all over them. So I just think I like to grow ones that are kind of weird. You know, I like a little weird pumpkin, and these ones certainly fall into that category. So these are the ones that we grew this year. Typically I make sure I select one that has a long vine. So usually at least a 10-foot, ideally more of a 15 to 20 foot vine length, and that way we know that they're going to grow up and cover, because some of them stay a little bit shorter and more petite, which is great for home gardens, but also isn't going to cover a tunnel like this. Now let's go down and take a look at some of the other things growing down here. Oh look, I have a dog plant here on the floor, on the ground. She is doing quite well. Oh, did you get a fly? Hi. You like the pumpkin tunnel too, don't you? It's nice and shady. So over here, now the loofah in my zone, I have to start inside because because we have a short growing season, and loofah in particular are a short daylight blooming variety. So that means that they put off their squash blossoms, their little blossoms to pollinate and turn into a loofah when the daylight is shorter, when there are less daylight hours. And we have a couple other plants like that. Chrysanthemums are another one that are daylight sensitive, so they only bloom when there are less than a certain number of daylight hours. So that means that typically it's not going to be blooming in the midsummer like our other pumpkins and squash are. So either we have to get blooms in spring or we won't get loofah. So if we don't get them in early and have them be mature enough of a plant to be blooming when the daylight hours are still a little bit shorter, then we're typically not going to get loofah. So that means for us, we're usually starting these inside 8 weeks before last frost and then transplanting them out. So I plant them in soil blocks because they tend to have less root disturbance than, for example, a seed tray. Here's another loofah we've got going. This one's a little bit smaller. This one's probably going to be our biggest one, and we have a couple more. So even though I have 4 loofah plants, I also only have 3 or 4 loofah. So we're actually going to let those keep growing here. I'm not going to harvest this today. I don't know if you can tell from this angle, but the end of this pumpkin tunnel is definitely starting to lean, and that's because I've got a lot of big pumpkins on here this year. This is probably the most prolific year that we've had in terms of pumpkin production, and so it's really kind of leaning the tunnel over this way, so you can see how it's, if I give it a little pull. So I've got 1 2x4 here holding up this one, but what I need to do is get all the weight off of here, and then we are going to have to prop this one up, and then I'm going to check these 2x6s down here at the ground. I think they're going to need another rebar reinforcements. Let's get harvesting. I'm going to grab all these pumpkins off and we'll see what we got. I got all the ones that were inside the tunnel, and you can see well, actually I've left a couple here. The ones that are growing through, I'm gonna have to come and do some surgery on to remove. But you can see here is our kind of initial harvest that we've got here. And now I have to get the ones that are on the outside because I tried getting one from the inside and it just rolled off and fell onto the ground. So that's going to become a sheep one. And yes, the sheep do get all of the discards from these pumpkins. So they're always happy about that. Here are some growing. Let's see. Now there's a couple down here. So we'll get this one and then we'll get the others on the other side. Now, in terms of harvesting, generally the best advice is to wait until the pumpkins are more developed. That means that the skin is thicker and tougher. You can see this one here is a newer squash. It's not quite as developed. And if I push my thumbnail into it, my dirty paint covered one, it really easily makes a mark. Really, I barely even have to press into it at all. That means that this one really is not quite ready to harvest. But here we are, we're getting close to last frost. I'm gonna leave a couple of these smaller ones on just to see if I can get them to develop a little bit more. But these ones, I mean, obviously this one is quite thick and hard. Generally, these ones are going to cure a little bit better, these ones with the thicker skin. But that being said, if your pumpkins and squash haven't developed that cure, that nice thick skin by the time it's time for you to harvest them based on your last frost, or if they're getting eaten by squirrels or whatever, go ahead and harvest them. We're going to take them into a protected spot to cure the rest of the way, and that's going to help give them that nice protective skin that's going to enable us to store these for the winter. So again, ideally you're waiting until they have that nice hard skin to harvest, but if you can't, it's okay to still pick them. They just might not store as well and keep as well as the ones with that thicker, more dense skin. All right, here is what I have harvested in terms of pumpkin here from my tunnel. Now this isn't counting the bunch that I also harvested that had either been nibbled by Midnight and Roosevelt already or had some squirrel damage or that I dropped on the ground. But I am pretty happy with all of these. It's definitely gonna be enough for us to use for some decor and then through the winter. Now I'm going to take them over to the barn and we're going to put them in there on the table to cure. So I don't get really picky or persnickety about the conditions in which I'm curing my pumpkins. My conditions are this: one is that my sheep can't get them, and two is that squirrels can't get to them while they're curing because the skin is still a little bit softer, and so it's definitely more prone to squirrel nibbling right now at this stage when the skin hasn't quite fully cured and hardened yet. So I'm going to put it in the barn. It is shady in there. It does have a lot of temperature fluctuation, so if you don't have a special spot to cure your pumpkins, it's okay. A garage you can close off from squirrels would work. Really anywhere where you can keep those nibbling squirrels away from them. We're going to go ahead and cure them for about a week, and then after that we're going to put them into storage. Oh, and a quick tip, if you are decorating with your pumpkins and you want to put them out but you don't want squirrels nibbling them, is to take a little hot sauce and mix it with some water or some coconut oil and slather it or spray it all over the pumpkins before you put them out because the squirrels don't like that hot sauce. So we do that very successfully here, and we have a lot of squirrels. So they tend to leave them alone once they take that first nibble and find that it's hot. So if it rains, you might have to reapply it, but that's my tip for decorating with those pumpkins. All right, let's get these into the barn, and then we're going to clean up this tunnel, which is going to be no small job because there is a lot of vines. I'm going to have to roll down my sleeves because I don't know if anybody else gets this reaction to squash vines, but I get all itchy. If you watched our video this week about our food forest tour, then you'll know that we talked about the American plums. So the American plums, which you see growing here right next to the pumpkin tunnel, are really important because that plant provides a nice bird habitat, and the birds not only love nesting in here, they love feeding off these American plums and the choke cherries that we have growing in here. And the more birds we have, the less squash vine borers we have, because the birds are one of the primary predators of those squash vine borers, so they're really helpful to have around. but also having biodiversity in this tunnel. So it's not just pumpkins, of course. There's lots going on. We've got the ground cover. We have several different crops growing in here. And the other thing you can do if you have a lot of issues with squash vine borers is to grow a trap crop like blue Hubbard squash. So blue Hubbard squash actually are preferred by the squash vine borers. So if you tend to have a lot of them, if you plant that blue Hubbard squash, they tend to attack that blue Hubbard squash and leave the rest of your pumpkins alone. So unfortunately, probably unlikely that you'll get great blue Hubbards, but if you grow them alongside the pumpkins that you want, then you're less likely to have them be attacked. So you can give that a try as well. The other thing that I get asked frequently is, how do I prevent powdery mildew? Because powdery mildew, if you've grown pumpkins and squash before, you know that they're just prone to that, as are zinnias. Now, interestingly, I'm doing a video this week about our zinnias as well, but our zinnias don't have powdery mildew. My peonies do have a little powdery mildew, but I'll explain why I think that is. Our pumpkins don't have any powdery mildew, so that means I can compost these. It's a kind of annoying answer because it's not an answer that I can give you that's quick and easy. The answer, in my opinion, to getting squash plants and other plants that don't get that powdery mildew at the end of the season really comes down to soil health. So you know that here at the farm we really talk about and focus heavily on soil health. That's because it has so many benefits beyond just good yields. It has benefits like reduction in funguses and in disease, because the healthier our soil is, the easier it is for those plants to be able to fight off any of those that might be occurring naturally in the soil. So watch our videos. We talk a lot about regenerating the soil. Remember, our book is also coming out this winter that's going to talk about how to regenerate and create healthy soil food webs. That, in my opinion, has been the biggest aid here at the farm. I haven't changed anything. When our first 2 years, we had powdery mildew everywhere. And then as we started implementing all of these practices and we got rid of landscape fabric here at the farm, now we don't have any of those issues anymore. Our pest issues are non-existent. Our fungus issues are virtually non-existent with the exception of the peonies. And I think what happens with the peonies is that we're not able to do all the cover cropping in there. So our peonies, when I planted them, I didn't really know as much as I do now about preventing monoculture. So they are all planted in a row. If you remember watching our peony video, they're all planted together. And we did interplant them now with some other things in the walkways like native grasses, but they still are growing a lot of peonies together in one area, and it's difficult to cover crop in there. It's difficult to really promote good soil health practices when it's just a lot of monoculture perennials growing, versus in the field where we have a lot of different things going on. I can cover crop in those annual rows. So I think it's a little complicated, but in reference to the squash and why we don't have powdery mildew in here, I really think the answer is that soil health. All right, here is what we are left with now that I have taken down most of the squash vines. You can see all the pumpkins that grew in between the panels. So if you're doing this, remember to keep going out and pushing them through so that this doesn't happen. So I'm gonna have to probably cut these ones out, and I'll leave them out for the squirrels, the decoy. So now I'm gonna fix up the tunnel. So you can see this end is fine. I did leave the loofah down there because I still have some developing and they'll continue to do so, but I'm going to look at how I'm going to fix this. So this side, much better without the weight on it. It's not leaning nearly as much, but it is still a little bit. And once we get snow loads, of course, that's going to happen again. So by looking at it, you can see down here at the bottom that what happened in that big windstorm was this half actually lifted up because, again, this one end of the tunnel was open. This end lifted up off my rebar. So this rebar goes down into the ground 2 feet. And then we have these brackets that are attached to this 2x6. So the 2x6 attaches to these rebar that are about every few feet. And it lifted up and off there. So I am just going to straighten this back up. It's easy just to pull. I'm going to get this back on these brackets. And then I think this side, I might do new rebar because this side, it looks like it pushed way off and this rebar is actually a little bit loose. So, and this bracket popped off actually or got bent. So I'm just going to push this back into place, reattach these rebar and re-bracket it on, or I'll see if I can push this job off on Dave to do. Okay, babe? All right, guys, that's it for me today. I am going to go get myself all cleaned up and get my seeds started so that we can have something to plant into the tunnel. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video today about growing pumpkins on a cattle panel arbor. If you want to learn more about the structure itself and how we built it, I'm going to link that video down below so you can go watch that, check it out with all these vines growing on it so you can see a little bit better how it's constructed. If you enjoyed this video, remember to like and subscribe. It means a lot to us here at the farm. And we'll see you guys around here next time. Hey, if you do me a favor, can you post any pumpkin recipes in the comments below? I'd love to hear them. Thanks, guys.